What we need now is a full-throated account and affirmation of the role that men play and have played since the start of civilization. If it weren't for men, we would still be living in caves, afraid to come out.
Welcome back to another episode of Mic'd Up. My name is David Gordon, and I'm your host. This week, we have the honor of bringing you Dr. Deborah Savage, professor of theology at Franciscan University, to talk about something that doesn't really get enough attention in the age of feminism, and that is the masculine genius. Dr. Savage, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, especially to talk about this.
Absolutely. And you wrote a terrific essay on this called Adam's Gift, Man in the Order of Creation, where you made it your errand because we have Pope John Paul II, who rightly speaks to the feminine genius, especially when we're in an age where false machismo can indeed set in to the Orthodox Christian mindset. He extols the feminine genius. He extols the gifts of women. But there was a little bit of a nagging silence there, and that was on the masculine genius, man's role in the order of creation, what he's been tapped to do, what he excels at, and you sought to bring that forth in this essay, did you not?
Oh, yes. Actually, I've written more than just one essay about this, and I've given talks, especially at Franciscan, but other places. I call it various things, but I call it, for example, the gift of masculinity, in praise of men. I'm writing an essay right now for Substack. You might have heard of the new website there, where the thread they have is called What We Need Now. And they asked me to write about men because what we need now is a full-throated account and affirmation of the role that men play and have played since the start of civilization. If it weren't for men, we would still be living in caves, afraid to come out.
Absolutely. I think that's a fair point. Just as a preliminary question, though, I'm going to throw this out there. I think part of the reason, and you call it a lacuna of Pope John Paul II's pontificate, that he didn't explicitly name the masculine genius, that he didn't coin this term to kind of be the partner term to the feminine genius. That's my read of what you're saying, and I think it's a good faith critique. But isn't the masculine genius just it being geniuses? I mean, and I don't mean that in any kind of snarky way, but if you look at the numbers, there are 8 times as many male geniuses as there are female geniuses. We outperform women on every standardized test in existence, whether it's the MCAT, the LSAT, the SATs. Isn't the masculine genius to excel at something that is analytical, intellectual, logically driven? Do we really need to spell it out? And is that the reason that perhaps John Paul II didn't say anything about the masculine genius?
Yeah, well, let me start by saying I'm not entirely comfortable with the word genius, whether it applies to women or men. I think that it's not a word that's in the tradition. A better word might be charism, right? The particular gift that men bring to the world, the particular gift that women bring to the world. And I agree with what you just said. In fact, if you might recall from my article that my argument is that men are oriented toward things, but not in a way that is necessarily disordered, but they are particularly gifted at, and this is found in Scripture, as you know, I derive it from Genesis 2, basically. Let me just start there. Man is in the garden before a woman even arrived with God, which is rather important. We could come back to that. But he's there with all of the sort of lower ordered creatures. God brings them one by one to him, and that's how he figures out that they figure out he's alone, right? But this gets overlooked. This is really, in my mind, the place to derive from Scripture what man's particular gift is. Because he he is able to see into the nature of things in order to name them and therefore take dominion over them. And St. Thomas even says that man would have had to have been given a distinct preternatural gift in order to permit him to see into the nature of things like that. Now, all the data indicates that women are more oriented toward persons, men toward things. Sociological data, psychological data, the way men's brains are structured versus women's, etc. But this isn't just about toy trucks and then big trucks when you get older. It actually results in your particular gift of declaring what something is, what can be predicated of it, and further, a systematic way of making that determination. And so this has resulted in systems of theology, taxonomy, philosophy, science. And so, yes, I think it's true that men are more analytical than women. It doesn't mean that women don't have intelligence and that they don't have reason. They do. They're rational creatures because they're the same, they have the same human soul. Reason, will, and freedom belong to them. But man really is to see what is the created order all about. So picture, I'll just make one more comment, and I know I need to stop for a minute and let you say something. But it's so exciting to me to realize this, and be able to say it, especially to young men on college campuses who've never heard this before. That picture Adam, God gives him responsibility over the garden at Genesis 2:15, and he looks up to God. He says, "Okay, fine. You want me to till and keep the garden? Fine, for all of eternity." Yes, for all of eternity, Adam. Just get to work. Okay, every day the same routine. It's not, and he's willing to do it, of course, but it's not until woman shows up that he knows what it's for. Now he says, "Oh, this makes sense to me. Here's bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. I see. I'm here to build a world that she can live in." Men are world builders, absolutely, right? And women, you could say, are world sustainers. But we can dispute those terms. The point is that men have this incredible importance, and their gift really is tied to that. They know, they're very curious about creation. They want to unpack what it's for. They want to make it work for the benefit of humanity. And men have sustained civilizations, enabled them to grow and develop since the beginning.
Sure.
And we should be grateful to them. Grateful to them, not ridicule them. It makes me so mad. So anyway.
Absolutely. And what's sad is that has become politically incorrect to say. Everything that we said leading up to this moment in the show is politically incorrect to say. We live in a society that really rejects the theological anthropology of Scripture, of the creation story. We know from 1 Corinthians that woman was created for man. So of course she's going to have, the feminine genius will be to relate to people. You put it nicely in your essay, channeling John Paul II, that the feminine genius is to be oriented towards person. But her duty, her calling as man's helpmeet, is what makes woman oriented towards persons. God has given her the gift of the feminine genius exactly in order to help her fulfill the duty, her vocation as man's helpmeet. But man, since, as you note in your essay, he was alone in Eden. He was alone there to care for the garden, to care for paradise. Of course, his charism, as you say, is going to inhere in caring for the created order and having this very unmediated role, an unmediated connection to the created order. So then why is it that the modern world seems insistent upon thrusting women out into the world to kind of ape the role of men? Why can't we say that men, like John Chrysostom says, that men have an outward role in society, and women have the role in the home. Why can't we say that anymore?
I don't know. I guess maybe it's a little bit reductionist. But I understand what you're saying. I think men are oriented toward the outside, women toward the inside. This is for sure. But the point of departure for understanding woman is there's a little bit more to it than what you said, although I don't necessarily disagree with what you said. When woman arrives, this is the thing. I agree with John Paul's account that woman is oriented toward persons because she's meant to be a mother. There's plenty of data that indicates that. I'm perfectly fine with that. Some people accuse him of biological determinism, but he doesn't mean that, and that's silly. But I'd say there's a prior point of departure for deriving the feminine genius, and that is that woman has never lived in a created order, not already inhabited by persons. First thing she sees is Adam's face. And the other objects of creation are sort of on the periphery of her gaze. So women have never lived in a created order that doesn't already have persons in it. And that's her first read. Now the other thing you should know is that when helpmeet, actually the Hebrew terms it's a zer for starters. It doesn't mean servant or slave or subservient or anything. A zer is a word used in the Psalms quite frequently, especially Psalm 121, and it means divine aid. And also the second word that comes in that passage is kenegdo, a zer kenegdo. Kenegdo is a preposition meaning in front of in the spatial sense. And so my argument would be that the divine author or the sacred author is communicating to us that woman and man are face to face, but woman's role is to help man to live, right? So I think the reason people get upset is because it's actually not what you described. It's not an adequate account of woman. And I'm not disputing that her role is to sustain the family in the ways that we all are familiar with. But I think we have to give woman her due, because in the ancient Talmudic tradition, you can follow this all the way up to our understanding of who Mary is. Woman is actually Shekinah, which means divine presence. So the task of woman is to bring the divine presence into the world, and she is an eschatological sign of what is to follow, what is ahead. So again, to reign is to serve, right? So you can still argue that both men and women are like king and queen. I'll take the queen role. It's all okay with me. Yeah. But both are royalty. The man's watching the horizon, making sure that there's no barbarians at the gate. The woman is ensuring that the home is quiet and peaceful and orderly, etc. Both of these
that's where I want to.
Essential.
I do want to emphasize this point, and this is Pius X in 1909. It kind of addresses this in a speech he gives. He says, Scripture, and especially the three epistles of St. Paul, emphasizes woman's dependence on man, her love and assistance, but not her slavery to him. So man rules, and woman follows, but it's not in this servile way that reflects brute domination. That's a whole other thing. So yes, that is absolutely part and parcel of the magisterium of the church. But I want to focus on something here, and this is something you'll see even at university level. At good Catholic universities, they are driving women into professions. And I was at Franciscan. I did my master's there. I was there for 3 years. And there certainly was a lot of careerism and pushing women out into the workforce and driving them in the workforce. And there's this notion that if women are not seeing the same amount of success in the workforce as men, that's somehow a systemic problem. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual human condition. But what you're saying, the natural logical fruit of it, is that it's to be expected that men are going to dominate in every single one of the professions. Men are going to be the CEOs. They're going to be the top lawyers at the law firms. They're going to be the top doctors. They're going to be the top scholars, because man was created to have this unmediated, uninhibited relationship to creation, to the material world, and to keep it. Whereas woman was created for relationship and for the feminine genius inheres in being oriented towards persons as opposed to things. But we're taught that this is a bad thing. And again, even Franciscan University is grooming young women to be careerist and oriented towards things as opposed to people. And I saw it there. I did.
Yeah. Let me say that I think that's frankly one of the reasons. I don't know that it was explicit, but I was certainly brought on board to help Franciscans sort this out, right? And I can tell you the history of this whole problem really begins with Aristotle, because he argued, as I'm sure you know, that women are malformed males, that men are the normative for the species, right? The male of the species has everything he needs to be human. Women are lacking something. And that's not the right way to look at it. That's not true. Women are not lacking something. They're fully human, but they're like the receptive principle, whereas man is the active principle. This is how I put it. So you have to know that the history, that particular error introduced so early in our tradition, followed the tradition affirmed it literally for centuries, because Aristotle never had a microscope, God bless him. He didn't know what woman was contributing to the reproductive act. That's the origin of the confusion. It seemed to him women are just vessels and man does all the work in that moment. So we can't really blame him, and Aristotle is a giant. We're all standing on his shoulders. But that particular error, even St. Thomas doesn't quite fall into that trap, but he sort of does. And so anyway, it wasn't until the 18th century, I think, we even discovered the ovum, the egg and the sperm. We even understood all that. And so it really, you find it in the Western philosophical intellectual tradition all the way up till there, and still. So what the result of that is that in our view, and this is, I'm here quoting Pope Benedict actually, as Joseph Ratzinger. He says what we have now is a situation in which only the masculine principle counts. I'm not saying men aren't important, I'm saying exactly the opposite. Only the masculine principle counts. So everybody's bought into this. The feminists, it's so funny, I feel so bad for them. They don't even know that they're arguing with Aristotle, for heaven's sake, that what the assumption is that the male of the species is normative for the species. And that isn't it. But they think the only way I can be considered human is to act like a man, to make my body into a man sterile, to fight with my own reproductive gifts, right?
Yeah.
To imitate him in every way. Girls want to join Boy Scouts. They don't like it if there's men's clubs. There's all. It's crazy.
Athletics, so, female competitive athletics.
Oh my gosh. And of course, as you know, right now what's really happening is we're systematically destroying women by pretending that biological males should be able to compete with them. Personally, I think it's all the work of the devil, because he's been undermining this relationship between man and woman since the garden. And I think he's on the verge of winning if we don't figure this out. So,
well, I think if we take your premise to be true, and I think you really hit the nail on the head with a lot of what you say, if we're elevating masculinity over femininity and the masculine genius over the feminine genius, then aren't we really elevating things over people?
No, and that's a very good point. And we're not elevating, I'm not looking at, we might differ on this. I don't look at them as man's above and woman's below exactly. I think it's better to think of it as the man is active, the man acts on the world. That's why we think of God or call God with masculine pronouns. The masculine, the active principle acts on the world, creates things outside of himself. Man creates things outside of himself. Woman creates on the inside, right? But doesn't mean we're both the same, 98% the same DNA. So we can do lots of things that both sexes can do. But so I don't think of it as elevating. Now, what did you say?
Things
one over
people.
the other.
Things over people.
No, well, yes, but this is, now again, you might not like this, I don't know, but I say that woman's role, because she's oriented toward persons, which is obviously a higher value than sex, he needs to, this is her job, is to constantly remind man that all human activity must be ordered toward authentic human flourishing. You can't make of yourself a gift to a bottom line or a project. And so, because on the other end of that notion of self-gift is for sure another person. So this is the beauty of fatherhood. This is the beauty of the man when he realizes that his work is for not her like a selfish woman or something. You're not her servant, but you're the servant of the family. You're working like dogs to provide for your families, right? This is your task. And it's really dangerous to ignore that fact. So I think man does have a tendency to forget about that aspect and become sort of obsessed with your work and so on. So, for example, in my
materialistic.
home,
I think you see that with a lot of men falling into that trap.
Absolutely. And you can be sure that it's a man that invented the artificial womb. You can be sure that it's a man who's behind this idea that somehow we're going to be able to we're going to be able to live forever by uploading our brains to a computer system or something like that. Technology is particularly a man's motivating factor. If we can do it, why not try it, right? A woman's task, and she's failing at this every day because of feminism, actually, is to remind us that persons matter more. And so whatever you're doing, you need to order it toward the good of humanity, not because it's fun to do, right?
Sure.
And so, so go ahead, David. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Go ahead.
No, not at all. You're the guest. You're the august guest. I was just going to interject, though. I think this is a natural temptation of man, is to forget that his unmediated connection with the material world and his expertise therein is not for its own sake. It's always at the service of something else. Just like in Genesis, man was to keep Eden as a pleasure park for God. And now man, of course, has his nexus with the material world, with the professions, in order to earn bread for his family. But I want to say this. So there's always the danger of forgetting that these things are ordered towards something greater and not ordered to creation itself. But with strong-arming women into these companies, and we have policies of affirmative action. We really are pushing women everywhere. They have a huge benefit. They're even writing standardized tests now so that women will excel. The essay sections are written on things that are really going to appeal largely to women because they think that if you're interested in the testing materials, then you're going to do better. There's a huge bonus to your application profile if you happen to be a woman, even more so if you're quote unquote a woman of color. We are shoehorning them into these roles, into the professions, into things that are traditionally the male world. Aren't we dispossessing men by that very same act of the professions, of the material world that they were created to have this connection with and to tend? And isn't that going to harm, in the end, men?
Oh, I think it's indisputable. Yeah. I mean, I have here, I was going to try to memorize some of it, but your audience might want to know that you can Google a wonderful list that's kept up to date by the American Enterprise Institute, someone at the American Enterprise Institute. Google for every 100 girls. And I'll just read to you a little bit, a couple of data points. Let's see. For every 100 girls who earn a master's degree, 61 men earn one. For every 100 girls. Let's see. For every 100 girls who between the ages of 20 to 24 die of homicide, 717 men die of homicide. So the data is really startling on this. Like, for every 100 girls, women incarcerated in state and federal prison, there are 1,225 boys. So there's, I think what you can say is that we value men's work more, or wait, is that right? Okay, one person I heard say, we value men's work more, but we value women's lives more. And so, anyway, that's maybe a tangential thing. But my point is that I both agree and would ask for, again, a little bit of nuance, because it goes back to the question of vocation, right? So every person is called to something. Men and women both are put on the earth for a reason.
No, Pius XII says all women are called towards motherhood, whether spiritual or physical.
I don't dispute that. JP2 says the same thing. So I think of myself as a spiritual mother to my students when I taught at the seminary. I was definitely a mom figure, and I was happy about that. I didn't try to teach like a man. And I think that's one of the reasons I was effective. And I get that feedback all the time. I know what I'm talking about, but I do it. Everything I do as a woman, and I don't try to pretend otherwise, So anyway, there's lots that you could say about that. And women can be very effective and very helpful in the corporate world because they're there to remind the men when they're going too far down that technological road. Let me give you this example. I worked in the business world for a long time in companies like Honeywell and other big companies, Advanced Micro Devices, et cetera. And I would say to the men, I was often the only woman in the room in a higher level management meeting, and the men would be running off on this or the other thing. And I would say, wait a second, guys, haven't we forgotten about the human element in some fashion? And this was back in the 80s. So I'm sure this wouldn't happen now because men are now afraid of women. But maybe they always were. But they would say, don't worry about it, Deborah, you're just making it complicated. And then sure enough, it happened at least 10 times during the years I was at Honeywell. We had to go back and do it over because they hadn't paid attention to that. So I think women can make a legitimate contribution in the workplace. But what you're right about, in my opinion, is that women, as I said, have become convinced that the only way they get to be fully human, to exercise their potential, is to act like men, to want the things that men have.
Well, it seems like that is a bit of the satanical treachery that's taking place right now. And you mentioned that more women are in higher education now than men. And, that's the case at the bachelor's level, and the statistic that you quoted was at the master's level. So we are we're inverting the roles of the sexes. We're making essentially men oriented towards persons, or at least trying to. And this was all part of the plan, by the way.
No, actually, David, that's not really true that we're making them more oriented toward persons.
Well, sensitivity training, HR in companies.
Oh, sure. No, that's a good point. But the tragedy is that men have left the workforce.
Well, that is absolutely true also. The number of men who've given up on the workforce has increased fivefold in the last about 30 years or so. That's also true. But we are inverting the sex roles in that we're making women we're pushing them to work, we're pushing them to the top of the profession, and men, we're actually happy with them leaving. We're trying to soften them. And, you know, from our first discussion, this is where the first wave feminists were just as evil as heck. You know, Susan B. Anthony wanted, quote, womanly men and manly women. This has been the plan from the outset. It was something they foresaw even in the first wave.
Okay. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know. I have not read that about her, so I don't know that much about first wave feminism. I know plenty about second wave.
Sure.
But I had always thought of them as brave women who wanted to vote, but I must have a uneducated view.
Yeah, that's how it's been spun. That is the Kool-Aid, you know, and I'm not saying you've drunk the Kool-Aid. It's just that is what I thought until I looked into it also. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but that would be far from the truth. But I guess my question to you is this. Reading your essay, this Adam's Gift essay, how can we have this trajectory societally and hope to be happy when we're shoehorning people into roles that they aren't suited for? If the masculine gift is to be really ordered towards things and creation, of course, in service of a higher good, and the feminine gift is to be ordered towards persons, then if we're mixing that up, isn't that bad for the entirety of the human race?
Well, I don't know. For one thing, I don't think you can reverse the things completely anyway right now. But I don't know that I agree that it's really that particular thing is that bad, in the sense that corporations, the business world, is really at risk of, because the feminine presence, because everybody working in a corporation is all trying to do the same thing, you know. The act, like Ratzinger says, only the masculine principle counts. And so you try to be tough in those corporate settings. You try to lead like a guy, you try to be aggressive, etc. The person is getting forgotten. What we need, if we're going to have this, I think diversity is important in that sense. And I say that the only real diversity is man and woman. That's where it all starts. Every race has man and woman. So if you don't get man and woman right, you're not going to get any of the rest of it right. When the person is suffering in the business world and many professions because the women are trying to be like men. Nobody's attending to the needs of people, except for kind of useless HR departments that only complicate things or are all involved in DEI training. Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
So, no, I think women's roles in the public sphere have in fact become essential because of this. But if they just come in and do the same, get stuck in the same crap or run the same rat race that the men are running, then there's no one pulling the culture back to a true pursuit of the actual authentic good of humanity.
Well, this is what we're doing, though. We're purposely doing this. The feminist movement is purposely making women gruff and manly. This is that whole Sheryl Sandberg lean in mentality where we're lamenting the fact that little boys are more bold from a younger age in giving answers in class and whatnot, and that they're more naturally aggressive, which of course goes with being active, that masculine activity versus the natural female passivity, which is what you noted, why we call God Father, which also, by the way, is related to his governance of the world and his headship over it. That's also why we call him Father. But I mean, I agree in that sense. It seems, though, that, yeah, absolutely, we're grooming little girls to be this way, to ape the masculine genius, to ape... Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I would say we're actually sort of systematically destroying the boy. Maybe also, or the... there's a book by Leonard Sachs called Boys Adrift, in which he describes the educational system in these terms. He says that the gold standard of behavior in a kindergarten or first grade classroom is girls' behavior. You have to be able to sit quietly for hours, pay attention, don't move. When the little boys come in at, let's say, the age of 5 or 6, and developmentally, their brains have developed in different ways. By the time they're 14, they all catch up, right? But the visual cortex of the boy lags behind to some extent, which is why boys tend to learn how to read later. But now
they're literally dumber than little girls. Little boys that's just a fact. They are less intelligent until the age of about.
Well, I don't know. You use, I don't know, such stark language. I wouldn't put it that way. Well, but they have a different kind of intelligence. They can figure stuff out that girls don't even want to touch, right? But my point is that the classroom is organized around what girls need now. And so men, the boys, who enter into a classroom where they're expected to read, even though developmentally they're not ready, what do they conclude? I don't like school. The teacher doesn't like me. I must be stupid. They're put on ADHD medication because they can't sit still. We've taken away all the fun equipment like jungle gyms and all the things that people might fall off of. So the feminine influence is, not in a good way, is creating this environment in which boys are being asked to imitate girls, like you're saying, or to act like them, or they get in trouble. So sure. I think it was Pius XII was one of the Piuses that wrote a church document arguing that boys and girls should be educated separately. And I totally agree with that.
In his encyclical on education, he argues strongly against coeducation. Yeah, it's Pius XI.
Great. Yeah, and I think I totally agree with that. I would have sent my daughter to a all girls school if I could have. That wasn't an option. She went to a classical school, a good Catholic school, so that was good. But it's I don't know about this. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say, because I think you make a good point, because I think some of the backlash is that, women just shouldn't be in the professional world at all. They should not be seen there. And, John Paul II, in his magisterium, makes clear, thank you, women who work. Now, he doesn't go into the circumstances behind that, and to square that with the prior magisterium of the church, I don't think he could possibly be talking about married women who work unnecessarily, because that would contradict previous magisterium through the centuries. But he certainly makes a point of saying just what you said. Women bring their unique person-oriented attitudes into the workplace when they are there. And obviously the circumstances we could go back and forth on of when it's licit for them to be out there. Right. But certainly he says that they do, when they are properly in the workplace, they are bringing their gifts to it and they're making it a better place precisely because they are oriented on the person. Yeah. So that way we don't have just this amoral machine of a company.
Right. Oh, right. It's so true. I was asked to give a talk at a conference on Joseph Ratzinger's work just before he died, actually, at Franciscan, and they wanted me to speak about women in the church because, of course, everyone thinks women are supposed to have a job. And I say, well, if you feel like she needs to have a place on the organizational chart, that's fine, I suppose. Although if to reduce woman to a function will destroy her. Dietrich von Hildebrand says that, and also the Eastern Orthodox theologians I tend to consult say that too. She doesn't belong in the bureaucratic maze. Don't absorb her into the bureaucratic maze. But wherever she ends up, what she's supposed to bring is the divine presence. If nobody's doing that, then we're doomed. So you give woman a functional task. She could be an accountant. She could sit on whatever theological commission you want. But if she's not bringing the divine presence, if she's not contributing that deep, reflective, and I think a better word, a safer word is receptive, not passive. Women aren't passive by any means. It's an active receptivity. Passive is a bad word. Don't use it because you'll just make girls mad.
I disagree.
Well,
I think that's the doctors
okay.
of the church, the fathers of the church, they make it quite
But
clear
that's
that
because
passivity and
Aristotle used
receptivity.
it. That's because Aristotle used it, and it's because he didn't understand that the woman was receiving the seed. Okay, so we can't really. Anyway, let's not get distracted by that.
Sure, and we're up against the clock. If you could,
oh, of course.
No. I wanted you to end up on one further question. Maybe you could address one further thing. But if you have any closing remarks on this point, please go ahead.
Okay. All right. Oh no, go ahead. It's okay.
I'd like to ask you, what do you see the practical application of a recognition of the masculine genius, as you state in your essay? What's a practical application of that recognition to modern society? How would we recognize and encourage the masculine genius in Western society today?
Yeah, well, there's a few things we have to do right away, and one of them is the way we're raising boys. And fathers, oh yes, that we haven't talked about fathers. The data on fatherless homes is really frightening. Now, 85% of all young men in prisons come from fatherless homes. So and there's all sorts of other data statistics I could quote. It's a disaster that we have sidelined fathers. We think we can do without fathers in the home. We cannot. The father is the child gets his identity or hers from the father. Okay, so, and there's much more we could say about that. So you think about the kids in Chicago that are killing each other, you could be sure there's no fathers in those homes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Statistically,
where are they?
It's true.
It's true. And so it's the breakdown of the family that is contributing to this mess for sure, especially in communities where, the father has been sort of sent away because they get more money if they don't have a father in the home. A family is 4 times more likely to live below the poverty level without a father in the home. So that's the first thing, is correct our family policies so that we understand and affirm and insist that men take their place in the family system. They're sort of, what do you call that? Checking out of all of that. They're spending their time in basements playing video games. The next thing I say is, young women, when a young man wants to have sex with you, even though you're not married to him, you say no. No. The reason we are in this mess is because in the 1960s, women got the feeling they were no longer allowed to say no. And that has destroyed our young men because why? Because they do not have an opportunity. They're not forced or forced is the wrong word, but encouraged to pursue a life of heroic virtue. Those desires are gratified. Sexual energy is really potent, right? And a man who is told no, once you make something of yourself, let's get married and live a good life, then we'll talk. But, do you understand what I'm saying? Chastity at that age, at the age 16 on, is a rite of passage. And when we allow our young people to pretend that it's just another thing, just another biological function, we are sowing the seeds of our own destruction, especially that of young men. Although that's not really true either, because young women are they're completely destroyed by promiscuity, right? So I think moms and dads need to have a conversation with both their young boys, and their daughters about both these things. And women have, the moment of freedom, the moment of choice is not at the moment when you have to decide whether or not to abort a child. The moment of choice and maximum freedom is when a young woman says yes to a man's demand for sex when there's no commitment and no intent to marry.
Right.
Etc. Yeah. So, and then the other thing, what was it that, I always affirm the men in my life, not in some fake way, but honor them. So I've seen women who try to take center stage in particular moments when the man really could be permitted to take his own place, take his place in the scenery. And part of woman's charism is to embrace. That's why women tend to be so like octopuses, right? They just want to cover everything because they can multitask. But it becomes, because of original sin, a sort of disease. So a woman needs to allow for the man to find his place again. And I'm not saying that in a way that men couldn't find it on their own or anything. I'm just saying women are interfering with men's growth rather than calling them to their fuller potential.
Well, I think that's a really excellent sentiment and a shrewd observation. Dr. Savage, we are up against the clock, so I'm going to have to end the interview here, but I'd like to thank you for being on with us and for raising some of these great points and some profound points that you're calling attention to in your writing, in your teaching. I'm very appreciative that you would take the time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today.
Happy to do it.